All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our August 2023 Power Hour. Slight agenda change. Today, we are going to be talking about managing ambiguity and change, which I know are hot topics for many people, and hopefully this is helpful. So this presentation is going to be about, Sabrina, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can still see the right screen? Thank you. Something moved on my screen and I just wanted to make sure it was right. And you're the only video on.
Marissa, I could see the thumbnails on the left. I don't know if that's intentional.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you. My computer flashed and I didn't know what that meant. So thank you all for your patience. So again, today is about managing ambiguity and change. I know that this is something that comes up a lot in my conversations with organizations. How do we consistently navigate these environments that are ambiguous? We don't actually know what's coming. Change is constantly happening, and we know that ambiguity and change makes people uncomfortable. So how do we do that, both for ourselves and, if you are managers in the room, for people who we are managing? So some science to this before we get into it. So before we get into how to do this. So the science of ambiguity and change. So y'all know, if you are anything like me, you like and seek stability, certainty, and safety. We don't like changing things because the way that we've always done it feels mentally comfortable. When ambiguity comes up or when change is happening, it triggers the emotional parts of our brains, which is triggered a whole lot faster than the conscious, logical, and intellectual parts of our brain that actually tell us that we are safe. So what happens is we experience all of these emotions related to the change that we're hearing about, the change that we're navigating, the ambiguity that is just sort of constant. We're hearing those things and we're feeling the emotions before our brain catches up. And so ambiguity and change take away our brain's ability to predict and calculate next steps. It makes many of us feel unstable and unsafe, which can cause resistance and avoidance, even when change is in our best interest. I know that I have been in so many situations where I know that the change is good and I still feel unstable and unsafe. And I'm still resisting the change. My parents had to literally peel me off of the doorstep to go to college. I was so excited about college, but I didn't want to go. I was scared. I didn't want the change in my life. The second I was there, I didn't call home for like 4 months. So sorry, Mom and Dad, if you are watching this. That was a long time ago. But when we are experiencing these things, it triggers both physical and psychological disorientation, sometimes pain, sometimes it looks like anxiety, sometimes it looks like fear, sometimes it looks like depression or fatigue or even anger. The bottom line is it triggers a lot of things. And I know that I am not alone in this. Most of the people that I work with and coach also are feeling these things. I'll note here that lots of companies will ask during interviews, how do you handle ambiguity? And they're looking for like, I love ambiguity. I don't trust that so much. I think that there are people who handle ambiguity better, who might be more excited by ambiguity, but ambiguity really shouldn't be the end goal. We want to create as much clarity as possible to be able to support people through whatever they are going through. That doesn't mean that we're going to have all the answers at all times, but ambiguity is something that we know influences us and most people negatively. This is important when we're in workplaces, because when people feel unsure or unsafe, or anxiety, fear, depression, fatigue, anger, all of those things, productivity decreases, memory suffers, our ability to think clearly is reduced. And something that's interesting is that we often also perceive the people around us as more hostile, or we might perceive our environment as more hostile than it actually is, because we are trying to keep our bubble close to keep ourselves safe. So The most stressful and uncomfortable change is change that is both unpredictable and uncontrollable. So something like a global pandemic, shutting everything down with no medical guidance whatsoever for the first few weeks. Unpredictable and uncontrollable is most stressful and uncomfortable. And our brain finds uncertainty so uncomfortable that we are often better at dealing with bad news than no news at all. So if you are a manager, you very often will probably hear your people say, we just want people to be transparent. We want you to tell us what's going on. And we often withhold bad news because we don't want people to be scared. We don't want people to be turned off. We don't want people to quit. But when we withhold that information, we throw people into this ambiguity space of no news, which makes their head spirals. And very often the stories that people make up in their head are worse than the stories that are real. Interestingly, people who have experienced trauma are more likely to be triggered by change and ambiguity. So for our leaders in the room, that is something that I want you to think about as a lens, that trauma heightens our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And so when change and ambiguity happens, your people who have a history of trauma are already at that heightened space. So this is going to heighten that even more. And of course, we all have different tolerance levels for ambiguity, and that's normal and natural. And as we're thinking about ourselves, we want to communicate our personal tolerance level for ambiguity. Spoiler alert, mine is very, very low. It's higher now that I'm out on my own with my own company, but my ambiguity tolerance level is quite low, but I do know people who have higher tolerance levels. And you want to get to know those people and their preferences as well. We don't want to make assumptions prematurely. So there's this scientific phenomenon called the ambiguity effect. So in meme form, this is what that looks like. So a little shark comes up, or a big shark comes up. Hi, would you like to interact with me? And the little fishy goes, your ambiguity deeply concerns me. So this is what the ambiguity effect looks like in graphic form. What does the science tell us? So the ambiguity effect means that when faced with deciding between two possible actions, one with a known outcome and one with an unknown outcome, humans tend to choose the option with the known outcome. This doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get the best outcomes. It just means that we are programmed to minimize ambiguity at all costs. Our brains skip the hard part of making estimates or guesses about the ambiguous choice. And we go straight for the familiar, which means that, again, we may not be getting the most innovative solutions. We may not be maximizing collaboration. We may not be able to be creative or find the third way when it's always been a certain way. So the ambiguity effect is about when we skip this part of making estimations about how things are going to turn out, it leads us to believe that actions with the highest known probability are always best for us or our company or for our organization or for our team. That's not always true. It's actually an example of a cognitive bias, and it's a mental shortcut that is designed to protect us, but it's one that we want to break because sometimes leaning into that ambiguity space is actually the most powerful space that we can be in. The bottom line, though, is that in 2023, our mental whiteboards are full. Our cognitive resources and our ability to manage change and uncertainty are more limited than ever. This has to do with the input of information, the quantity of stuff going on in the outside world, in addition to the stuff in our own worlds. We've got work, we've got personal, we've got social justice challenges, we've got all of these things that are compounding, which makes our brain really, really full, which makes us much less able to handle ambiguity as we move forward. So what do we do about this? So there are 10 strategies that I'm going to share with you today, 10 ways to manage ambiguity and change at work. I'm not going to go through all of these super deeply, but we will follow up with all of the materials so you have them and you can feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. So 10 ways to manage ambiguity and change at work. We're going to start with number 1 and make our ways down to number 10. So number 1, to deal with ambiguity and change, we need to be upfront and honest about what we need as individuals and prioritize our own self-care and comfort. If you are a manager, we also need to prioritize the care and comfort of our direct reports. And I'm going to talk more about that. So when things at work are feeling particularly ambiguous, uncertain, or unclear, I want you to think about, what does this feel like in your mind or in your body? How do you physically, emotionally, or verbally react or behave in that moment? When you are triggered physically, emotionally, or verbally by ambiguity and change, and I don't mean triggered necessarily in a bad way, but when you're noticing that in yourself, what might other people notice or observe about you? Do you turn away? Do you take longer breaks? Do you get agitated and frustrated? What will other people see first? And then what are the things that are happening for you that people might not be able to see? So maybe on the inside, you are boiling, but you are walking around with a giant smile on your face. I'm not very good at that, but some people really are. So what might people notice about you and what might they not notice about you? In these moments, what do you need or want from other people? And what strategies do you use or can you use to take care of yourself? These last 2 questions are deeply personal. Well, actually, all of these questions are deeply personal, but there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So your trick is to figure out how to tell your body that you are safe, how to notice when your body or your mind is not feeling safe, and what you need, and then being proactive about going after what you need and truly caring for yourself and making your body and mind feel comfortable again. So this is coupled with number 2, I believe, if I'm correct here, which is that we have to understand our locus of control and sphere of influence. So sometimes I talk to people, and I know I was guilty of this as well when I was working in workplaces. Sometimes I talk to people who say that, well, I can't actually care for myself because if I take that break, I'm going to get in trouble. Or the system doesn't allow for self-care. Or there's so much change happening in the system around me that I actually can't control creating a comfort zone for myself. So the trick is, what can you control? What are the things that you can do in your particular context to be able to support yourself and potentially support others? So when we're thinking about understanding your locus of control and sphere of influence, I like to think about this in terms of 3 different spheres. So on the inside is our sphere of control. These are the things that we have direct control over. We have control over ourselves and our behaviors. Then outside of that, we have our sphere of influence, which is where we might be able to influence others or the system to create change. But then there's everything else. Our sphere of control and our sphere of influence, these are our power zones. This is where I want us to live, especially when you're encountering ambiguity and change at high levels. We want to lean into our sphere of control and sphere of influence and try to let go of everything else. Even though your brain is saying, hey, there's this thing over here, you need to pay attention to it. It's really scary. It's really bad. What if I get fired tomorrow? What if layoffs come? If that is not something within your sphere of control or sphere of influence, what would it look like to just release those feelings? What would it feel like to release those feelings? And the more we can stay out of that danger zone, the more equipped our body and mind are going to be able to manage ambiguity and change. So number 3 is, and this one is really, really helpful for me, is that we can focus on what we are clear on. So when we are faced with a ton of ambiguity or uncertainty, we get caught in all of the things that we don't know. But chances are you know a lot more than you think. So what we want to do is focus in on what we are clear on related to our vision, our work, our role, and our goals, and clarify for that ourselves and tell ourselves, this is what I know. This is what's within my control. This is what's within my sphere of influence. This is what I am proud of and what I can do and be excited about right now, even in the face of this change or uncertainty. This is what I know that I love, and focusing in on that. So when you get the follow-up materials, this is a mindfulness exercise where you can couple this with deep breaths, where you do 5 things that you are 100% certain and clear about. 4 things that are within your locus of control, 3 things that are within your sphere of influence, 2 things that you are proud or excited about, and 1 thing that you love about your work. And do this as many times as you need to be able to reset your nervous system. Number 4 is that when we are faced with ambiguity and change, we can expect the best and plan for the worst. So we want to ask ourselves, what is the best case scenario here? Can I make this my expectation? Living there is a nice place to live. That's definitely not where I live a lot of the time. The other question is, what's the worst case scenario? And then honing in on that, on what is within your locus of control if the worst case scenario happens, and what can you plan to do? More than 90% of the time, that's an arbitrary number. I'm just saying a number. A lot of the time, the worst case scenario is not actually the thing that happens. But when we can plan for that worst case scenario and name that even if that worst case scenario happens, there are things within our locus of control, that helps our brain rewire. It helps create spaciousness for healing and for processing and for waiting for whatever comes next. For those planners in the room, this makes a really big difference. This helps us trick our brain into thinking that we are in control, even when we might not fully be in control. Number 5 is that we can shift our attention. So we want to seek out and celebrate, if possible, the positive things that are happening. Again, we have cognitive bias that seeks out the negative. So, but our attention creates our reality and determines how we experience our lives. Our attention is very easily captured by thoughts tied to stress or threat, because again, your body wants to protect you. And so again, if you're anything like me, when you are thrust into a change situation or an ambiguity situation, your brain might get stuck in these ruminating loops of negative thoughts that reinforce each other. Once they start, it's hard to turn them off. So when we are faced with a change that makes us feel threatened, stressed, or confused, what good could happen? Again, we want to simulate the best case scenario and try not to simulate the worst case scenario. We want to plan for the worst case scenario, but don't simulate it. We want to choose to see what's actually happening to us and in our environment, rather than what might happen in the hypothetical doom spiral that our brains create. And we also want to unravel the assumptions and interpretations that we're making, because so many of them probably aren't grounded in reality. So these are some of the things that I have heard from some of my coaching clients very recently. Things like, my boss is out to get me, or they're doing this because they don't care about us, or everyone is going to get fired, or they're not sharing because they don't know what's happening, or they don't know what they're doing. These things become these gratuitous feedback loops that do not help us. So we want to unravel those assumptions and really try to figure out what is trustworthy. What are the positives in this situation that I can focus on, rather than focusing on the doomsday spiral? Another thing that we can do is notice and challenge negative thoughts as soon as they come to mind. So when you notice that doomsday spiral, we want to interrupt it and instead practice compassionate self-talk. I am not a huge fan of positive self-talk as a strategy. It really works for some people. That looks like, yay, you're amazing, keep going. All of these things that we're told by motivational speakers, we need to put like sticky notes on our mirrors. That's great, right? If that works for you, there's no shame in that game. But for me, practicing compassionate self-talk has been much, much more effective to getting some of these negative narratives out of my head. So compassionate self-talk sounds like things are really hard right now and I'm feeling normal human emotions, or this situation that I'm in isn't healthy for me, or I am a human being and being human is hard sometimes. One of my favorites is I have experienced stress like this before and I got through it. These feelings I'm having about myself are untrustworthy. These are really different than just saying, you can do it, you can power through. This is about, again, giving yourself a warm hug and saying everything is going to be okay. So that's number 6. What's number 7? Number 7 is that when we are in these ambiguous spaces at work or we're experiencing this rapid change, we want to do everything we can to avoid blame, gossip, and rumors. So I know that I have been a part of many collective sense-making experiences where you are gathered in a break room or you go for a walk or you're at happy hour and everyone is just talking about what's happening and how terrible it is, or how great it is. Sometimes collective sense-making can be a good thing. But when we enter into that, again, we can get into the trap of being within our own assumptions, or validating assumptions that may or may not be true. So rumors, gossip, and blaming are highest when people feel the most insecure, unsafe, or uncertain. This is a way that we as humans seize control and power because if we can talk about it with other people, it makes it feel more safe, more real, like you have a community going through it with you together. And it makes us feel better. And it's emotionally rewarding in the short term when we get to vent and cry and badmouth our bosses or the leadership team or our direct reports. That makes us feel better in the short term. But the thing is that in the long term, this contributes to lack of trust, more insecurity, less good relationships, and harder mental health. So or less mental health in the ecosystem at large. So it's really important that to the extent possible, even though it gives us short-term gratification, we want to avoid blame, gossip, and rumors and fueling that rumor mill. Number 8 is that we want to assume the best of people and their intentions. And one of my favorite practices here is to practice generous interpretations. So generous interpretations means that as opposed to assuming that people are bad, that their intentions are bad, we are going to operate on assumptions about others that are generous and hope-filled and positive. This is not the same thing as gaslighting ourselves. A lot of times people are bad and do bad things. But if we can try to operate from a place of generous interpretations, even with those people, that can go a really long way into making us feel safer and more secure in those periods of uncertainty. So we want to provide space to assume the best and see the good whenever possible. And we want to accept our own roles in when expectations are not being met. And so that can look like a lot of different things. I'm not going to go through this super in detail, but in the follow-up materials, you will get this. These ungenerous interpretations are things that happen all the time. So thinking of somebody or an organization as blameworthy, or thinking of somebody as inherently lazy or stupid or bad, or thinking that you yourself don't have the resources or capacity to help, or thinking of somebody else as a competition or a threat to your success. Those are all ungenerous interpretations. And then we couple them with dysfunctional beliefs about other people. The better alternative is to practice generous interpretations, which may sound like, I wonder what additional obstacles they may be facing that I can't see, or everyone just wants to feel safe, secure, and loved, or I really believe that my company has our best interest in mind, even if I'm not seeing that right now, or if I don't have all the information. And so, again, this is about tricking our brains a little bit into a space of generosity rather than distrust. Again, that helps rewire our nervous systems. Number 9 is that as much as possible, we want to set aside time for reflection. So we want to be proactive and responsive and retroactive. We want to look at all of these different things to really be able to see, to probe what is actually happening right now, or what do I expect to happen in the future. It can be helpful to replay experiences in our minds to discover more about ourselves and to help us manage challenges in the future. So when you're thinking about retroactive reflection, maybe your company has just gone through a round of layoffs. And so now you want to think about, all right, we're moving from this one ambiguous time to another ambiguous time as we're figuring out who we are now. And so this reflection on what did I wish that I had done in that first period that I can apply to this new period. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but this is a good framework for setting the stage for reflection and moving towards action and accountability within your reflection process. And number 10 is that we need to take it one step at a time. So when we are faced with the huge picture, it's really easy to look up this stairwell and see that we don't know where it ends. When we're faced with this, the question we want to ask ourselves is, what is the next best step? And just focus there. We cannot focus on the whole staircase, especially if we don't have control or influence over the way that that staircase is being built or maneuvered, or how it was built. Really focusing on that next best right step is one of the most powerful things that I can share. So those are our 10 ways to deal with ambiguity and change at work. For those of you who are tuning in on the recording, my contact information is here. Feel free to reach out if you have additional questions or if you would like these materials. And thank you so much for joining us.